is 1 o'clock on the dot, Central Time. So we'll get started here. Welcome to the National Conversations. Today we'll be covering Firesight, and we'll be hearing from Jonathan Reimer and Mark Kohler. We also have Dr. Chen on the call today. She will be kind of addressing any questions that are put in the chat. The chat's going to be on the top right of your screen. You can just throw anything in there. We'll do our best to address them, and if we don't catch it during the call, then we'll hopefully follow up by email afterwards. Yeah, that is it for housekeeping, I think. If you'd like to listen to the presentation in French, you can change your language down on the bottom right. We do have a live interpreter on today, and you'll hear and see everything in French. Yeah, so I will pass it over to Jonathan now to start us off.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And I'm really excited to be here today to be talking about prediction in wildfire and how to make better ones. And we'll be launching Firesight, which is a forecasting platform for wildfire management. And so just to outline what today is going to look like for you folks, I'm going to say a few words about prediction. Then we're going to turn it over to the Good Judgment Project and Mark Kohler, which is a group of people who have really upended the science of art of prediction in the last 10 plus years here. And then we'll look at Firesight, that platform we talked about. And all of that will take us about 45 minutes or so. And so after that, we'll be addressing as many questions as we can. So that's our agenda for today. And just to set the scene, prediction is baked into wildfire management. There's not a lot I have to say that is going to be incredibly insightful, because everything we do involves the work of prediction. The very first thing I learned, and I think most of us did, is not to fight the fire that we have, but to fight the fire that we're going to have. And we are constantly thinking about what's coming next, what don't we see, and whether that is, we know that it matters whether a lightning storm is going to start, 2 fires or 20 fires in 3 days, when that comes through. It matters whether that fire, that large fire in your zone, is going to be contained by end of week or not. It matters whether we should be expecting a major cold front passage 10 days from now. And it very much matters whether we need to be pushing the button on a resource request a month or more out, because we are going to need resources from, say, our partner members of CIFFC, or perhaps even internationally. And we're even going and predicting from season to season things like overwintering fires. How many are there going to be, and where are they going to be? What can we do to mitigate those issues? So we're doing those predictions from season to season, year to year. And when we're making all of these predictions, there's really 2 things that matter. The first is that we do a good job, that we get the prediction right, and there's shades of rightness there, in the sense that it helps to be more confident. So instead of just saying we might have a cold front next week, it helps to say, hey, we're 90-95% we're going to see a major cold front passage in the middle of next week. And then the other thing that matters is that we're early. So if we can see farther, that makes a big difference in our ability to have effective operations, to keep our costs down, of course, for the safety of our firefighters, and of course the safety of our communities as well. So that's why prediction matters, and that's why it got our attention. When we started hearing about 10 years ago about a group of folks that were called super forecasters, which almost sounds like a Marvel team or something. But they're a team of people, or a type of people, a classification of folks who just seem to be able to reliably out-predict accurate experts. So they're seeing things more accurately, and they're seeing it earlier. In fact, they're seeing about 400 days out events as accurately as most of us would see about 150 days out. So that's twice as far. That's, about as good as my math is here. But perhaps most interestingly, you can take a person like me or you, and you can train them to predict like super forecasters do. And all of this together has really changed the science and the art of predicting in all sorts of industries, and was clearly relevant to the work that we do in wildfire management. Uh, we're going to learn a little bit more about this in a second, but you know, a group of folks who kind of demonstrated this for the first time recognize this as the largest increase in judgmental forecaster accuracy ever recorded in the literature. And so that's really exciting to me. I want to hear more about what our super forecasters doing, how are they doing it, and then what can we take for our work in wildfire management. And so for that, I'd like to invite a super forecaster himself, Mark Kohler. Welcome, and we're really glad to have you here.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Am I coming through, Hannah? Thanks, Jonathan. I'm Mark Kohler. I'm one of the few Americans working in Good Judgment Project. For example, I'm joined today by our chief scientist, Dr. Eva Chen. Eva, give a little wave. And our founder, Phil Tetlock, and the author of the book Super Forecasting. He himself is Canadian, so it's nice to be a guest among all the, I don't know, a fox among the chickens or something. But the company that Phil Tetlock set up and the research project was called the Good Judgment Project. And Jonathan asked us to talk a little bit about the background. 9/11 was not a good day for U.S. intelligence services. They didn't see it coming. And part of the U.S. government response was, we've got to do better. We've got to do a better job on seeing farther into the future and seeing around the corner, especially before the other guys do, the bad guys do. So they set up something called the Intelligence Advanced Research Project Activity. That's a mouthful, so Eva and I refer to it as IARPA. And IARPA, you may have heard of DARPA in the Defense Department, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. DARPA played a key role in things like inventing the internet and some other stuff. And IARPA is the U.S. intelligence community's equivalent. They're supposed to be building new capabilities. And in this case, they were tasked with trying to see if there are ways to improve the accuracy of forecasts that we make, looking out 8 weeks, 8 months, even into several years. So they set up a tournament, a 4-year tournament, and they invited teams from academia to participate in the tournament. And one of them was a Good Judgment Project from Phil Tetlock. And they said every night, well, we're going to ask you a bunch of questions, such as the kind that Jonathan and Mike Wotton have put on the Firesight platform. Questions of the forum, will event X happen before date Y? And the only requirements were that people had to answer, number one, with a probability, not yes or no, but 73% likely. It's 73% likely that event X will happen before date Y, or 62 or 12%. They had to answer with a probability. And number two, that in some way, shape, or form, all the individual forecasts, mine and Jonathan's and Hannah's, were somehow combined and then reported back to the U.S. government at the end of the day. So we ask a bunch of questions. Everyone forecasts. Those four aggregate forecasts are reported back every day. And we just wait and see. In the end, either the event occurs or it doesn't. And we can go back and look at the history of forecasts and say which team was the most accurate the earliest. Exactly what Jonathan just mentioned. We wanted to be accurate, and we wanted to be accurate early. So in the first year, Phil Tetlock's team did very well indeed. That's the The red bar in the middle diagram, they were supposed to be 15 or 20% better than a baseline, which was just the average of a whole bunch of normal people without any special training or conditions. And they did very well indeed. They were 55% better than that baseline. You always expect in these situations that the leader will revert to the mean in the next season and that someone else will sort of perform or outperform. But that's not what happened. Tetlock's team was about 80% more accurate in year two, and everyone else was not very good. In fact, they didn't even meet the sort of standards for that year. And so the U.S. government dismissed the participation of all the other teams for the remaining 2 years of the research project. So in year three and year four, they poured all their research funds into Phil Tetlock's team and said, what else can you do? What other modifications can you make to boost the accuracy of forecasts you make? Unbeknownst to Tetlock's team, in year three, while they sent people like you and me, Eva and Hannah, while they sent us questions, unclassified questions to work on, they would send the exact same questions to the U.S. intelligence community. Of course, the U.S. intelligence community has access to confidential information, secret information. The idea was to say, what does access to secret information, how much will that boost the accuracy of the forecasts you make? Well, I wrote 34% better. The intelligence community was not 34% better. People like you and me were 34% better than the intelligence community. So why do we mention all this? Because something that Tetlock and his team was doing, his team primarily of Canadians that they were doing, really was able to boost the accuracy of forecasts. It wasn't just geopolitical forecasts. Originally, with the U.S. intelligence community, that was the focus. Will Russia invade Ukraine? Will something happen in Syria? But more recently, the same approach, the same methodology has been used with, for example, financial indicators. The U.S. Federal Reserve meets 6 times a year and sets interest rates. The Good Judgment Project started to ask its forecasters to work together to see when the Fed would raise or lower interest rates. And the Financial Times of London reported just a couple of weeks ago that people like you and me, using best methods, using Tetlock's best methods, are about 30% more accurate than the leading market indicator, something called the CME futures indicator. So it appears that this methodology, this way of doing things, A, has wide applicability, and B, is something that you don't need special information. You don't need, financial databases. You don't need national security information to be able to perform well in. And if you think about it, there's really not a lot of intelligence about the future, right? There's no intelligence telling us what's going to happen in June 2025. And if you're an intelligence analyst or a financial analyst and rely on that sort of thing, your search for information means that you're not thinking about what data is available here and now and how to make sense of it. So Phil Tetlock and another Canadian, Dan Gardner, wrote up their findings in the book Super Forecasting. The French language version is there also. And it's a fairly easy read. And what it talks about, the approach it takes, is something we'll be discussing for the rest of the session today. But essentially, Tetlock and a Nobel Prize winner who just passed away, Daniel Kahneman, both of whom were at the University of British Columbia for multiple years together and who continued to collaborate right up until Professor Kahneman died this past year. They kind of believe that the human brain works in 2 ways, system 1 and system 2. System 1 is how our brain works when we're driving a car or running down a football pitch. You're not thinking to yourself, here comes a turn. I need to move the wheel exactly 27 degrees in order to get past the intersection. It's all sort of intuitive. You're driving the car, and I could be sitting next to you while you're driving, and we could be having discussion about wildfires in Canada, and it wouldn't really detract from your ability to drive the car. So driving the car, walking down the street, those are system one activities, intuitive, kind of going on in background, and they don't take up a lot of energy or effort, mental energy. System two is what happens when I ask you, what is 17 times 24? Or if we're playing a chess game. If we're playing chess and I start talking to you about wildfires in Canada, your brain has a choice. You can either focus on the chess game or on the discussion, but you can't do both. System two is greedy. It occupies a lot of your brain. It prevents other types of thinking from going on concurrently, and it's tiresome. We're going to be talking about system one and system two, and the the fact that system one errors bedevil all of us, but that you can overcome some of them by using system two. But before we do that, I'd just like to ask you to join me in a little forecasting exercise. And Dr. Eva Chen will be running this in background. If you were born in the first half of the year, January to June, please navigate on your phone or on your iPad, navigate to delfinio.com, the address in the top box, delfinio.com. And then you'll see two boxes. One will ask for your name and the other will ask for the code. For the name, you can put in whatever you want. You can just put in your initials. For the code, if you were born between January and June, please put in ZP9NC. Now, if you were born between July and December, same thing, except a different code. Please put in FFZQR. And once you've done that, you will see a question pop up. And I can't see it right now, but I think Eva is there. Let's take a quick look. All right. Eva, it seems to me that Delfinio is up and running. Okay, everybody, you're going to see a question. So I've talked a little bit, Jonathan talked quite a bit about super forecasters, and I told you a little bit about the research project run by Phil Tatlock. And the first question is asking you something about the number of super forecasters that were identified in the first year. So please do me a favor and answer that question. How many, what was the size of the original group of super forecasters in the Good Judgment Project? By the way, that was between year 2011 and 2012. So you have a question there. Was it greater or fewer than a number? Please answer that. We'll give you about 10 seconds, and then we're going to advance to our next question. Okay, folks, please hit submit. And Eva, please advance to the next question. And here you're going to see two different questions. So we'll give you a minute to fill these out. One of the questions will ask you something else about the number of super forecasters. And the second question is about the current geopolitical event. So please take a couple seconds, 10, 20, 30 seconds, think about your answer. And I'm looking for a whole number to put in, the number of super forecasters. And then for the second question about the current events, we're looking for a probability between 0 and 100%, a whole number between 0 and 100. So we'll give you 30 seconds to do that. How about 15 more seconds, everybody? Try and wrap up your answers. All right. Please hit submit in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Please hit submit. And we'll just talk a little bit longer while Eva, Dr. Chen, works in the background to quickly tally up our responses. Back to the Good Judgment Project and Phil Tatlock and Danny Kahneman. They understood that human beings, all of us, make systematic errors in judgment when we are thinking about conditions of uncertainty. If I ask you how many kids you have, you're not going to make a systematic error. You know darn well how many kids you have or you don't have. But if I ask you how many hectares of Alberta will burn in July 2025 in wildfires, now we're in a condition of deep uncertainty. And this is where something called cognitive biases can really take hold. Here's a visual example of a cognitive bias, right? So you've probably all seen this before. We have two arrow-like things, and there's a horizontal line between them. And the question is the horizontal line in the top figure longer than the bottom, or is the bottom longer than the top? And you look at it, and it's kind of hard to tell. In fact, they're the same. They're the same length. Now, I don't know about you, but I cannot see them as the same length. System one, that deep, intuitive, instant thinking, tells me that the top one is longer than the bottom one. Now, I can override that system two, right? I can hold a ruler up and measure it, or I can sort of hold my finger up to the screen, and I can prove through deliberative mental effort that they are the same length. But if you're like me, your default is to misperceive, right? So this is a type of bias. This is a persistent distortion of reality. And what we found that when we ask people to make forecasts about the future, a very uncertain thing, all sorts of cognitive biases take hold. Here's a good example, one that we've talked about quite a bit. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, they've lived in Canada, they've lived in the US. I'm not exactly sure where they are right now, but imagine that we were meeting together in the pub and I turned to you and I said, hey, what's the probability that they stay married? So you can try this tonight, right? You can go talk to your friends and say, hey, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, what's the probability they stay married? I forecast that most people will answer, well, they love each other very much. And when Meghan Markle was a little girl, she had a picture of Prince Harry taped to her wall. And, you know, they've survived their divorce with the royal family in London. And this seems like a match made in heaven. They're going to make it. So 90% likely they stay married, right? That's how most people would answer the question. Very, very few of us would say, well, you know, it's an interesting question. About half of Americans who get married are divorced within 7 years. And about half of Brits who get married are divorced within 7 years. Right? Very few people would sort of talk about the durability of the institution of marriage itself. We call the first approach the inside view. How will this man and this woman, how will their relationship continue? And we call the second approach the outside view. On average, how have marriages unfolded in the past? It turns out that if you approach a forecast question, how many hectares will burn? Will Alex Ovechkin beat Wayne Gretzky's record? It turns out that people who attempt to begin to answer that question by thinking of the history of the problem, the outside view, how has this thing gone in the past? People who start there and then consider the inside view are about 10% more accurate than people who start with the inside view and then maybe do or do not consider the outside view. So we think that something called the base rate is an essential way to start thinking. And that's because people are base rate insensitive. And again, you can try this with your pals tonight. Ask them, will they stay married or something else, and see how they respond, right? Very few people are going to start talking about the outside view. Now, this is only the starting point. You start by considering, how do situations like this usually go? Of course, it's important that they are still together after leaving the royal household, that they're still together in California, that they have 2 kids. Of course, the specifics of this man and woman's life are important. But a cognitive process that only considers that second will yield a more accurate forecast. Jonathan will talk later about the forecasting platform Firesight. And here is one of the questions currently on that platform. Will the province or territory, Canadian province or territory, declare a state of emergency due to wildfires in 2025? All of you have deep expertise, lots of experience on this topic. It may be that you're inclined to say, well, I'm here in BC, and gosh, we've never seen such bad fuel moisture, and the weather, there's low snowpack in January, and it doesn't look good, right? You might start there, and that's not necessarily invalid. But what Phil Tatlock would have you believe is that it's worth starting your forecast by considering, how many times has a territory or province declared a state of emergency due to wildfire? And here's my list. So it looks like 8 times in 35 years. In other words, since 1989, in 23% of years, a state or territory has declared a territory or province has declared a state of emergency from wildfires. Now, you might look at this list and say, hang on, Mark, something really changed. Something really changed in the mid 2000 teens, right? Because we had 2 in about 30 years, and then, we've had something almost every year since 2017. Maybe it's climate change. Maybe the government of Canada is more willing to declare states of emergency. Who knows? But something material has changed. And so we don't want to consider, from the founding of Canada to the present, we want to consider only the sort of recent events since this change occurs. So that's fine. Let's do that. So then we see that 6 times in the last 7 years, a state or territory, a province or territory has declared a state of emergency due to wildfire. So we might say, actually, the probability is 86%. I don't know, and this is something I'd want to discuss with you, and we can discuss online on the Firesight platform. 2023 saw BC, Alberta, and the Northwest Territories all declare states of emergency from a set of wildfires that were perhaps had more in common than they were completely separate incidents. So do we want to count that as one event or as 3 separate events? This is something we should talk about. And merely having that talk about how this kind of thing has normally developed would be very important. So maybe it's 57% likely, maybe it's 86% likely, I'm not sure. But since 2017, no matter how you slice it, most years have seen the declaration of a state of emergency due to wildfire in at least one province or territory. So that's my starting point. That's my base rate. That it is greater than 50%, maybe 57%, 86%, maybe we'll cut the baby in half and call it 71.5%. It is more likely than not that in 2025, based on recent history, that 2025 will see a declared state of emergency. Now, remember, I said this is just the starting point, and we always want to start with the outside view, but then consider the inside view. So in this case, this is where your expertise comes in. So first of all, non-experts like me, we can sit together and discuss, what does history tell us? What is the base rate of this event? How do situations like this normally go in the past? And then step 2 is the inside view. And this is where your expertise really takes off, right? Here's a prediction from Canadian Services for August. Looks like there's going to be a lot of dryness and a lot of disparity between historical norms with respect to fire danger. This is where the discussion about this year, this fire, this province, this dryness, this weather pattern takes place. We do have that discussion, we just have it second. People who approach a new forecast question like this are minimum 10% more accurate than people who don't. That's because human beings are base rate insensitive. If you can overcome, if you can mitigate base rate insensitivity, you'll see a boost in the accuracy of the forecast you made. Why is getting the right base rate so important? Because of a second cognitive bias called anchoring. Dr. Chen and I were in California 5-6 years ago, sitting around a conference room. There were about 35 people in the room, and we placed at everyone's seat a piece of paper like this, right? There was a question, will there be a lethal confrontation in the South China Sea before such and such a date? And the papers were all exactly the same, except for a little number in the upper right-hand side. An unexplained number, possibly a typo from the point of view of the recipients. But half of the piece of paper had a single digit between 1 and 10. And half of the pieces of paper had a double digit between 90 and 91. But the question was the same, right? Put your name in and answer this question. There was no reference to that number. Startlingly, people in group 1 who had a single digit in the upper right of their paper, the average of their forecast for this event occurring was 32 points lower than people in group 2. 32 points on a 100-point scale. Also startling, 5 of the 35 people in the room gave as their forecast the number on their paper. And when we handed the papers back to everyone afterwards, most of them said, I didn't even know that number was there. I didn't even pay attention to it. You might not have done so consciously, but unconsciously you did. It turns out that when we are in a deeply uncertain intellectual environment and we're asked to make a forecast, our brains become very, very susceptible to numbers. Any numbers on the periphery of our consciousness, even the digital clock on the wall, can distort the forecast that we subsequently make. This is called anchoring, right? And so people who anchored on a low number gave a lower forecast, and people who anchored on a high number gave a higher forecast. Think back to a minute to the base rate problem. If you initially say it's 90% likely that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle will stay married, and then I come to you and show you the divorce statistics, you might come down, but you'll stop. You'll stop too soon. If, on the other hand, you started at 50-50, if you looked at the outside view, at the divorce statistics, and then you considered how successful these two are, you would come up a little bit. Turns out this number is usually more accurate than that number. The number informed first by the outside view and then the inside view is more accurate than inside view to outside view. Why? Because anchoring, the first number that we settle on, plays a very powerful continuing influence in all our subsequent thinking. Were you anchored? In the questions that you just had, we asked you, what was the size of the original group of super forecasters in the Good Judgment Project? Half of you received a question on Delfinio that said, were there fewer or more than 5? And half of you received a question that there were fewer or more than 5,000. Group 1, the average of your answer was 12. Group 2, the average answer you gave was 2,840. Once again, those of you who received that first question, were there fewer or more than 5? And then we said, how many do you think there were? Your average answer was 12. And group 2, you were asked, were there fewer or more than 5,000? And then we said, how many do you think there were? Your average answer was 2,840. Now, you got the same question. How many do you think there were? And, nobody knows the answer here. Well, Eva does, but the rest of us didn't. But the distortion is something like 200x. This is very inconvenient. It's very inconvenient that when we're struggling with questions under conditions of uncertainty, even something like the number on the digital clock on the wall can affect the forecast we make. We cannot make this go away. Since we can't make it go away, make sure that your first number is informed by the base rate, by the history of how this thing has usually gone in the past. There's another fallacy that we'll talk about today. And by the way, there are hundreds of cognitive biases that have been detected and explored by cognitive psychologists. We're just going to talk about three today: anchoring, base rate and sensitivity, and something called the narrative fallacy. Way back during the Cold War, our hero, Danny Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner who just passed away, asked a bunch of political scientists. He had a bunch of political scientists available, and he divided them randomly into two groups. The first group, he said, hey, what's the probability there would be a suspension in diplomatic relations between Washington and Moscow sometime in 1983? And the second group, he said, hey, what is the probability there'll be a Russian invasion of Poland followed by a suspension of diplomatic relations between Washington and Moscow sometimes in 83? Now, when you see both of these together, you know that the probability group one assigns should be higher than the probability that group two assigns. Why? Because group two says Russian invasion of Poland and then breakdown in diplomatic relations, right? It's a very specific pathway. Group one, it could be a Russian invasion of Poland or a Russian invasion of Czechoslovakia, a Russian invasion of Hungary. You know, they just don't like each other, a brouhaha somewhere else, right? There's a whole variety of ways that would count for group one. And group two, there's only one pathway. They have to invade Warsaw first. So we know that group one should give a higher forecast. And in fact, political scientists identified option two as being 4 times more likely. It simply cannot be the case. It cannot be the case that it is more probable for two events, invasion, suspension of relations, to be more likely than one of those events alone, suspension of relations. What's going on here? In group one, they had to engage system two. They had to do all the thinking themselves. They had to say, how could this happen? How could relations break down? Group two, we gave you a story. Close your eyes. You can imagine the tanks going across the cobblestone streets in Warsaw and the terrified looks of the people who were watching the Soviets roll in. That sounds plausible. And the human brain is designed to confuse plausibility with probability. This is called the narrative fallacy, and this is why marketing and advertising works. Let's look at a question that we asked you. Just now, 10 minutes ago, half of you received a question: will a nuclear weapon be detonated in armed conflict before November 1st, 2025? And then half of you got a different question. As EU nations increase military spending, Vladimir Putin will take more brazen actions to resolve the Ukraine conflict. Will Russia detonate a tactical nuclear weapon inside Ukraine before 2025, right? So you can look at this. Group one was asked, anywhere in the world, will any kind of nuclear weapon be detonated? China, India, Pakistan, Israel, Syria, Russia, Ukraine, anywhere in the world. Group two was asked, will Putin detonate a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine? So much smaller, right? Much smaller probability. As you see both questions together, you know that the probability of group one's question is higher than group two. In fact, group one, the average forecast you made was 12%. Group two, the average forecast you made was 20%. 12% for group one, 20% for group two. What's going on here? Our brains, especially when trying to make decisions under conditions of uncertainty, we're susceptible to stories. If you give me a good story, I will confuse probability with plausibility. right? Oh, that makes sense. That's plausible. Therefore, it's likely. And that's not true. And that's not true. How does this matter? When you go into the incident management team and you say, will the fire jump the ridge line into the next valley and walk out? You're going to get one kind of answer. If you go into the incident management team or to the IMATs, to the weather forecasters or the F bands, and you say, will the fire jump the ridge to the next valley because the winds are really picking up and there's all sorts of heavy undergrowth in the next valley? If you give them that story, you can actually drive them to give you a higher forecast. What this tells us is how you ask a question and how you are asked a question will influence the answer you give. In this case, the forecast that the fire will jump over the ridge into the next valley. There are, again, hundreds of cognitive biases that impact the accuracy of the forecast we're trying to make. We talked about a couple of them today: anchoring, base rate, and sensitivity, and narrative fallacies. There's a few more that really impact forecast accuracy. And there's a very fine publication uh, put out by Jonathan Reimer and Mike Walton and Kelvin Hirsch. There, I put the link on the bottom right, the internet link. You can pull up this discussion paper, and they talk about how a subset of these cognitive biases impact decisions that wildland fire managers make. I think it's well worth pulling up this discussion paper. But what we found is that, and Jonathan presented this in a talk to about 2 months ago to Canadian fire managers. 1 hour of debiasing training, sort of like what we've been going through right now, can boost the accuracy of the forecast we make by 14%. 1 hour. And what Dr. Eva Chen has found is that a little bit more than that, about 4 to 8 hours of training, can boost judgmental accuracy under conditions of uncertainty by twice that much, by 28%. You all will be making hundreds or thousands of decisions this coming fire season. What if you were 28% more accurate in each of those decisions? We're not talking about omniscience. We're not talking about godlike perceptions of the future. But in those 1,000 decisions that you're going to make this year, if you were 28% more accurate in each decision be saved, how many fewer firefighters would be harmed or killed? These kind of boosts in accuracy really give you a slow and steady accumulation of advantage when you're forecasting, which is really the bread and butter of what you're doing. That's it for us from Good Judgment. And Eva is online and happy to take any questions, and as am I. But I think back to you, Jonathan, or Hannah at this point.
Back to me. All right. You know, I've seen that. It's kind of like seeing a magic trick where you know that they're gonna find the card at the end, but you don't know how it's done. Um, Really impressive work, Mark. There's so much to there, and I was really glad to have you speak to us today in the wildfire management world, because I think you're bang on there. Is that we don't think of ourselves necessarily as predicting or forecasting, but we're making 100 little judgments in conditions of very deep uncertainty. That is like, it's part of why we do what we do, and part of the challenge, and even the interest of it. And we all care very deeply. If you talk to any fire manager, they have uh, a lot of ideas about how we can do our work better, because they really care about this. You don't get into this certainly for the prestige and the money. You get into it because this is what you want to do better. And this is a really powerful way to do that. That brings me a little bit to the history of this site that I'm about to introduce to you. Uh, a group of fire managers got together and thought they had a good idea. Have you heard of that? And There was a bit of a grassroots initiative to build a forecasting platform to just explore some of these ideas. And that was out in the world, and it's been out in the world for about 2 fire seasons. but it was an invite only sort of thing. You had to know someone. And so some of you on this call have probably heard of it, have probably been on it, but it was never an official start. It was always something that, a group of people had put together really just because they thought it was important. But over those two fire seasons, we've seen more than 1,500 predictions turn out one way or another. And we've heard that people really enjoy this, and agencies are interested in the predictions people are making and whether they can be used to improve the operational decisions that we are making under deep uncertainty. And so, for the very first time, we are launching Firesight, this forecasting platform, officially to all wildfire uh, management agencies in Canada. So if you are working for a CIFFC member agency, you are invited to participate in this forecasting platform. And so I'd just like to put the link in the chat here, and I would invite all of you folks to click that link. So it's firesight.cultivateforecast.com, and open this up. It's going to open up in a new tab, and just have a look at it just really shortly. So just take two or 3 seconds. Again, Firesight, and it's as if it's foresight, so you're seeing it, and .cultivateforecast.com. But it's a lot easier if you just go up in the upper right hand side, open your messages. I put the link into that chat, and what you're going to see when that opens is a welcome to Firesight page, and you're going to see a blue button that says sign in. First thing to understand about this site is it is not a public site. We're treating this like an operational tool for you folks. So this is not a site that you can send to your non-fire friends and they can have a good laugh at what people think and so on. We are extending this to folks who work and study and research wildfires in Canada specifically. And so when you click on that sign in link, you will be automatically approved so long as you use your agency email. So use your agency email address to sign up. You're going to sail through that sign-in process. You shouldn't have any issue. If for some reason you don't have an agency email address, or there's somebody else that you think should be a part of this, scroll down the website towards the bottom. It's not a very long website. You'll see another blue box there that says contact us. Reach out to us. Tell us why you need this invite, what that email address is. We can extend that to you shortly. We'll try and get back to you within a day or two. So try and be a bit patient there. And then the second thing that you're going to be asked to do when you log in and create a new user is a username. You can create any kind of username that you would like. We generally try and recommend that you don't use your real name. So you just make up something funny, something ridiculous, something that maybe somebody would guess from. But if you use your real name, I actually wasn't aware of this. I thought everybody was using their real name. I used mine, and nothing bad happens. You can totally do that as well. So that's what's going on in terms of signing up. And I just want to bring you back. So now you've probably been on this other tab. Come back to us in the Boost tab. Come back to me. I want us to just step through what this website looks like once you are logged in. And I'm just going to share my screen here. So once you are logged in, this is the landing page of the website. This website is incredibly powerful. I'm going to show you about 5% of what you can do with this website. But if you are interested, dive as deep as you'd like. But generally, questions for forecasting are grouped into challenges. Here we have 2 of them. I'm going to click on the 2025 Fire Season Challenge. And here you can see we're all loaded up. We have 3 active questions right now because we are just developing questions. We reached out to some of the wildfire agencies, and we really care about developing questions that matter to them. But these are 3 that are just placeholders, places to start for us this year. And I'm going to open up the one that Mark talked about. Will a province or territory declare a state of emergency due to fires in 2025? You know, it's not a question that we particularly care about the state of emergency, but it generally goes along with things that we might care about. For example, large resource requests or the displacement of large amounts of people within a province or territory. Those are things that we do care about, and by knowing something about the likelihood of a state of emergency, we are getting indirectly at some of those questions. And so here, I found Mark's discussion quite kind of, I've been compelled by it. I think it's about right. Probably I think he said, 4 out of the last 7 years. So it was 57%. So that's what I'm going to forecast. But you can drag that slider back and forth. I actually haven't forecast anything this year. So let's go with 57%. And you can see also, why do you think you're right? This lets you put a comment in there. And so I'm going to put in the comment, starting with the base rate from the last 7 years, and we'll adjust as the season progresses. This is completely optional to put in a comment or not. We do recommend it for 2 reasons. One is that, if you look back, at a forecast you made a month or 2 back, you might see 83%, and you're not really sure what exactly brought you to that number. And so this is just a little bit of a cue to recall, hey, this is what I was thinking about at the time, this is what I cared about, and this is what's happened since. So now I can update that forecast. And the second is that, here, I'll just show you actually. So here's one of the many things you can do on this question. I can look at all of the other people who have forecasted this recently. So one person said 85, one said 100, one said 50, and each one of these has put a little comment in there, or at least some of them have put a little comment in there. And you can see, what are people thinking about? What are people, when you have a big spread between, say, 50 and 80%, why is one person saying that and one person saying the other? And so it's helpful to leave a bit of a comment. I'm just going to go back here to my comment, and I'm going to press the submit button. And you can see this is what happened. I made my comment, my forecast 57%. Right now, the crowd forecast is 67%. So I'm just a little bit on the low side. And you can say it's actually been creeping up over the last 24 hours here, and also over the last week. This is the crowd forecast over the week. You can get into these questions. There's no end to what you can do here. It's actually really powerful, really interesting stuff. But what I do want to draw your attention to is, now I've made my forecast, right? I would probably want to update that as things go along. So, in June, we're going to have less of a season in front of us, but we'll also have a little bit more. I'll know more about what the season is looking like and what July and August might look like. And so I might want to bump it up, bump it down, adjust it over time. The reason we don't just make one forecast and walk away is the same reason that you do this in your operational work. You're going to make a decision about what tactics to use, or how many resources to deploy into, say, a given division. And it's not a one-time decision most of the time. Most of the time, we get feedback at the end of the day, how are things going, and you can adjust that number up or down. And by practicing it here on the site, you're going to get better at that adjusting, that updating skill over time. But one of these days, this question is going to be resolved. A province or territory is going to have a state of emergency, or it's not. And I am going to get a score based on all of the different forecasts that I've made on this question. we can talk a lot about that score. The only thing that really matters about it is that low scores are better. It's a bit like golf on this one. Generally, you want a low score. Higher scores mean that you didn't get it right, or maybe it took you a long time to get it right, and that other people generally got it right before you did. And a low score means that you did very well. And once you answer a few of these, you, as a forecaster, uh, will get a score as well. And you can get a score for each challenge. So you can say, open a leaderboard for a given challenge. This is a leaderboard for one that we had last year. You can see me. I used my name. And I did third. So, that's why I opened this one, because I did pretty well at it. But here's a bunch of users, and you can see how you did, how other people you may know or think you might know did. And then there's also an overall leaderboard that tracks all of the different challenges, all of the different questions. And so you can have different things that you're tracking over time. And it's quite fun, actually, for me, I don't know, maybe I'm nerding out on this a little bit, where these questions that you think, oh yeah, I got this one, and then actually you don't do that well, but maybe you beat your friends, so it still works out. So that I find quite fun. And then beyond just beating your friends and trying to get good scores, there are different badges you can earn. And we're talking about some really neat ideas about how we can reward folks who do well this season. And so just stay tuned for maybe some more information about different sorts of rewards that we're going to be able to offer folks who do well. So it's not just bragging rights, there might actually be other things as well. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here. And I want to invite you that at the end of this session, open up. I think you'll probably still have your tab open with the Firesight website. Create a user right away, just straight after this session's done, and forecast at least one question. And why am I asking you to do this? You have a lot of things going on here. Fire season is in swing. I'm asking you for 3 different reasons. So the first is that you're helping your agency and other agencies get better at predicting things over time and hopefully informing our operational decisions. We still are working out how that's going to work, but by offering your best judgment as an expert, you're going to help that process along. The second is that this is actually going to be really good for you, that there's really clear data that by doing these sort of forecasts, you are sharpening your mind, you will improve your performance over time, and you're going to be better than the next guy who doesn't do this. And the last and certainly not the least one here is that it's actually a pretty good time. Like, it's quite entertaining to do this. Set maybe a reminder to check in on this maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, once every month, whatever works. We know you're very, very busy. You're wildfire professionals. This is the season. You're not going to be able to do this, every week in August. We get it. But by coming back to it, by seeing the different questions that we release and checking in over them over time, I think you're going to have a really good time. And we're going to do the best at trying to make it an enjoyable experience for you as well. So with that, I want to open this up to questions. And so Hannah, how can you guide us through questions for me, questions for Mark, questions for Dr. Chen, who is really kind of the guru of all of the science side of this?
So we are right at the 2 o'clock time of an hour, but if there are, the chat's been pretty active. If there are any questions, I would toss them in there, and then Mark and Dr. Chen have also been answering them in the chat, but we will send out kind of an email summary of all of those afterwards. So if you have places to be, we're right at an hour. Throw your question in the chat and we'll follow up. And thank you to everyone that was on the call today for tuning in, and thank you for all of our speakers. Yeah, we will hopefully see you for the next one.